So I'll quickly introduce myself. Beyond being the general manager at the Carlton Winemakers Studio, I'm a consulting winemaker in the Valley. I make wine for a couple different labels, Merriman and Asilda, and then my own wine. Before that, for the last 10 years, I was the winemaker at Lemelson Vineyards, and then for 7 years at Acacia in Napa, making Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And prior to that, I started in the Texas wine industry, in wine shops, etc. I went to Grinnell College in Iowa, which is a very small liberal arts school, 1,200 students, very much like Linfield. So I wandered the earth for about 5 years after college and then finally fell into wine. I wanted to talk to you from the perspective of a talk that we give every year to Oregon Pinot Camp. So starting off with harvest. So I want to talk about both white and reds, but of course harvest is the same. You guys already talked about the vineyard, so I'm going to go pretty quickly. This is Jesse Lang. Before, I think he's finally married, but he was the big heartthrob at Oregon Pinot Camp. So he's like having a picture of him. But he's out in the vineyard tasting, and that's what the winemaker's doing. A lot of their time is spent in the mornings going out, tasting the fruit while it's cool, assessing what the texture of the skins is, whether they're crispy and like a green apple, and they start to soften. Winemakers are like chefs, and you end up going with your gut a lot of the time, and your experience builds that intuition. Or here, this is Thomas from Anamie, is using a refractometer to check the sugar levels in the grapes. And it actually is just using the refractive index of sugar, so the higher the sugar goes, the more it's bending the light. And there's a readout inside that tells you what percent sugar or bricks the grapes are. And then people bring in samples to the winery and check other things like pH and TA, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those. So in Oregon, most things are hand harvested, but over the last few years we've had a lot of issues with labor. And actually this year wasn't bad. Even though it was a big harvest, we had plenty of labor. But a lot of people have switched over to mechanical harvesting, where as it goes through and it actually hits the base of the vine, is how most of the machines work. And the grapes fall into collection bins that are underneath it. And even some of these will actually have some processing on board. But really what it's doing is it's going into the bin and they're dumping it into a bin that can then be taken off to the winery. But what goes to the winery is fruit that really can't be sorted anymore. It's just the berries. It doesn't have the stems on there. And so that can change the wine, but a lot of people locally have been finding that if you can get the fruit clean in the vineyard, you can make really nice wine this way. So once it gets to the winery, the grapes are often picked into, here's some old school bins, wooden bins, but most of the time those plastic bins. And this is becoming very popular now with reefer trucks, and that's saved us at the studio. Is in cool years or in hot years, you definitely don't want to leave it outside. You're picking fruit warm. You want it to get chilled down once it gets into tank. So instead what you do is you put it into these reefer trucks. You get the temperature down to about 40 or 50 degrees, and then when you process it, destem the fruit off, it actually does it in a much cleaner break, and you can make very nice wines that way. But more specifically, at the studio, it's wonderful because we're all in line to use the same equipment. And this way you don't feel as bad. It's not sitting outside waiting and starting to, degrade. It's going into a refrigerator for, 12 to 24 hours at the most. The grapes are dumped into a hopper, dropped down onto usually a shaking table that then there's some people here who are sorting clusters. You can also have a conveyor belt. But it's extremely tiring work. I recommend doing it for about a half an hour and then not anymore. But in Oregon, you can do it for 16 hours a day. It just is the most brutal work. So, but the main point is that you're trying to end up with these beautiful little berries dropping into your tank. Or you might do what's called whole cluster, and I'll talk to you about that later, where you don't go through a destemmer and you're fermenting with the stems. But the whole point of sorting is to get rid of things like this, and this is botrytis cinerea, and it's a mold that grows, and it happens whenever, really what's happening is that if it rains during bloom, then you can start to get this growing on the inside, then it rains during harvest, and some of the berries puff up, break, and then you start getting this beautiful mold growing, which on Pinot Noir makes for horrible color and flavors and things like that. So on the top, this is a cool photo. We had champagne talked about at IPNC this year, which is here on the Linfield campus. And this is an old school press, like you might see in your grandpa's basement or your great-grandparents' basement. And so just slats on the side, and then a big piece of wood that goes on the top. The grapes are loaded in, and then it's squeezed from the top, usually with a screw mechanism. Any way of creating force, and then the juice falls out through here and is gathered up. This is a more modern press where the grapes are dumped directly in, and then there's a screen here, and it squeezes out into a pan, and then that's pumped off. So there's actually a bladder on the other side of this, which can be blown up with air, and you can actually program in exactly what pressures you want that to be. So one time when I was in Napa, we got some grapes from another winery in a custom project, and I went out to go taste them, and I swear it tasted like candy, and it had sugar crystals in it, and it was Pinot Noir from Russian River Valley in Napa, outside in Sonoma Valley. And it was 36% sugar, which is the highest I've ever seen. Then below that is balsamic vinegar, is actually, and this is real balsamic vinegar, at 27% sugar bricks. Let's see, then there's some surprising things, like watermelon. You'd expect it seems sweet, doesn't it? But in fact, watermelon has a very low acidity to it, and that acid always balances out the sugar levels. And so when you taste grapes in the grocery store, I don't know if we did that, but they're usually between 16 and 18 bricks. What we're harvesting is typically in Oregon somewhere between 21 to 28 bricks, a very high sugar. So grapes are really the sugar producers in the world, and that's why grape juice is the base of a lot of these juices. Cranberry juice, other things get mixed into. And you can see this is the inside of a destemmer right here, where the grapes actually drop through, and they go through, there's little paddles that move it along, and the berries get flung out of the bottom of that destemmer. And here's someone in a tank that has whole cluster, where the grapes are put in with the stems, and that makes for a much different texture in the wine and flavor. So you get sometimes green aromatics, but then very spicy, really interesting wines. The most expensive wine in the world is made with this method, whole cluster, Domaine Romani Conti, which is out of Burgundy. And there it's about $3,000 a bottle, depending on the bottle. Pre-fermentation and cold soak is this whole period is where the grapes come in. Maybe they've been chilled before you destem them, but in any case, you chill down that tank. And I think that cold soak actually originated as a logistic thing. And now there's a lot of people have ideas about how it changes. There's some thought it increases your color in the wine, increases your flavor, things like that. But really, if you're out making all those picking decisions, it's really nice to have things just sort of in a refrigerator, not doing much. So it's a period where you're letting the grapes sit cold, they're refrigerated, and they're not fermenting yet. And that gives you the ability to be out in the vineyard making other decisions, processing the other fruit, and then also doing analysis and making additions. So here you can see these guys who are in Burgundy adding sugar, which happens if you have a low sugar year. In these cool years in Oregon, 2010, 11, then you get that. And here some other additions, or this one is called Saignée, is bleeding off a little bit of the juice to increase the concentration. You're looking at how much juice there is to the skins. Or there's machines that you can use. And this is not very common here, but this will actually, through various methods, remove some of the water from it. And so you get a lot more concentrated starting juice. Dry ice is used a whole bunch, which makes these very pretty little clouds. But the idea there is to keep oxygen away more than anything. It's also used to chill things down. If you don't have a different way of doing it, you have to add huge amounts of dry ice to chill down grapes though. At the studio, we use a lot of dry ice, and we hang it in a bag just above the cap of the wine, just as it's starting up. And what that does is there's a whole range of microbes in wine and juice. And the ones that most of the ones you don't want oxygen. And so you're depriving them of oxygen so that the yeast can take up the nutrients and really start to ferment the sugar. Once they take over the whole thing. Here's a guy stomping grapes. So as I said, carbon dioxide is produced. And when that carbon dioxide is produced, it floats all the skins and the seeds and all that stuff up to the surface. And you have to find some way of pushing that back down, of mixing it. So you can pump from the bottom over the top, and or you can do this, which is called a punch down, where you put all of your weight onto this tiny little disc. Because what happens is the top, the part that floats to the top, as you can see right here, is it's called a cap, and it's very, very strong. You can actually, if you leave it for a day without doing much to it, you can step on it and walk across it. And so someone like this will put all of their weight on it just to get this little ring to push through, and then after that the juice comes up and you can start to really mix it. There's a pump over here, which is really common. I was surprised at the studio. What I love about being there is that there's all these great winemakers that you can turn the corner and talk to if you have a question about a wine or perspective or anything, but it's also seeing how they do it throughout, is because it's been a long time since I had a mentor or been around other winemakers on a daily basis like that. And I was surprised that most people are doing the pump overs now, versus punch downs has been very traditional for Pinot Noir. If there's anything that is, requires no electricity, etc., oftentimes that's done on Pinot Noir. And a lot of that goes back to the beginnings of where it was, and that the best Pinot Noirs are made and Chardonnays are made in Burgundy and France, or historically they are. So if you're trying to figure out how to do something, you go to the source and you ask them how they do it. And a lot of times in Burgundy, it's just they're farmers. They have very small plots of land. They go out, they pick them themselves, they put them in tanks, and they do what they can to make it. So oftentimes it's on a hillside, so they'll do gravity flow from one level to the next to the next. And here you have, the richest people in America saying, how do I make Pinot Noir? So they build a gravity flow facility and they do everything like they do in Burgundy. But the question is, does it actually make the difference that you think it does? And I'm not sure that we've really proven to ourselves, and I know we haven't by research, what exactly does doing one thing versus the other do. But again, it's like everything else. It's like cooking. You build up your intuition and you do what your gut tells you to do.